I turned on the headlights as I pulled onto the driveway of our suburban Seattle home. Twilight had thickened, spilling a soft darkness over the surrounding streets. Inside the car, a gentle jazz playlist played, a soundtrack I had always found perfect for a tired mind. But tonight, not even the music could chase away the emptiness that had settled inside me. The house greeted me with its usual silence. I shut the door behind me and placed my bag near the coat rack. A table lamp in the living room cast a warm glow over the coffee table and a stack of old magazines. Ryan, my husband, was sitting on the couch. His face, lit by the bluish glow of his laptop screen, was focused and, as always, inscrutable. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Hi," I said, passing into the kitchen, where the faint scent of leftover coffee lingered. "Hi," he replied, his eyes never leaving the screen. We had long since settled into this routine of automatic greetings and perfunctory questions. "How are you? How was your day?" Our evenings sounded like this, and tonight was no different. The monotony of life wrapped around me like a tightly wound blanket I couldn't escape. I sat down at the kitchen table, absently scrolling through my phone. There was no news, neither on the screen nor in my life. The world outside the window went on with its own rhythms, while I seemed stuck in some kind of time loop. Suddenly, a loud knock at the door startled me. We rarely had visitors, especially unannounced ones. Ryan didn't budge, so I got up and walked to the door. Standing on the doorstep was a young man with a backpack slung over one shoulder. His short blonde hair was slightly disheveled, and his face, though tired, radiated warmth. It was Josh, Ryan's nephew, whom I'd only met once, several years ago at a family gathering. "Hi," he said with a slightly sheepish smile. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced. I'm here for an internship and thought, maybe I could stay with you, just for a couple of months?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. On one hand, he was Ryan's family. On the other, I knew that having another person in the house might only add to the tension in our already strained relationship. Ryan, hearing the voice, finally appeared in the doorway to the living room. He glanced at Josh, then at me. "Of course, stay," he said calmly, as if it were the most natural decision in the world. I nodded, trying to smile, but something uneasy twisted in my chest. This unexpected change disrupted our familiar rhythm, and I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready for anything, really. As Josh headed upstairs with his backpack, I stayed in the hallway, staring into space. For a moment, the monotony seemed to retreat. But what would take its place? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Josh was already up, it seemed, judging by the quiet clinking of dishes coming from the kitchen. Still a little groggy, I passed Ryan, who was once again glued to his laptop, as if he hadn't gone to bed at all. "Good morning," Josh said with a smile as I entered the kitchen. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, his hair damp from a recent shower. "Hope I didn't wake you." "No, it's fine," I nodded, trying not to appear too detached. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, I just thought it'd be good to do something productive," he replied, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. "If you'd like, I could help with something you've been putting off. Like the garage, maybe?" I nearly laughed out loud. The garage had been a long-standing sore spot for me. It was so cluttered with stuff that stepping inside felt overwhelming, but Josh's enthusiasm seemed genuine, and without giving it much thought, I agreed. We spent hours sorting through old boxes, ancient photo albums, broken appliances, things I'd wanted to toss for ages but never had the courage to. Josh worked quickly and without unnecessary chatter, but as he was moving another box, he suddenly paused. "What's this?" he asked, pulling out a worn book with a battered cover barely holding together. "Oh, that?" I smiled. "Dandelion Wine by Bradbury. My favorite book back in college. I thought it was lost." He looked at me with genuine curiosity, and it caught me off guard more than I'd expected. Usually, my interests didn't elicit much of a reaction from Ryan. "It changed how I see time and life," I continued, not expecting to voice such a personal thought. "There's so much warmth and beauty in the simplest things." Josh sat down on a crate, running his fingers over the book. Do you really think so? I've always envied people who can see the world through stories like that. I've always wanted to, but honestly, I struggle with it. Do you enjoy reading? I asked, surprised. Honestly? Not as much as I'd like to, he admitted with a sheepish grin, but I'm always open to new things. Maybe this is a good place to start? I felt something new forming between us, a delicate but tangible thread of trust. The conversation shifted unexpectedly from books to music, then to art, and finally to life itself. He listened to me intently, as if every word mattered. It was strange, and it was nice. Unlike Ryan, who always seemed absorbed in his own world, Josh was fully engaged. He asked questions, shared his thoughts, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly heard. By the time we finished clearing out the garage, I already knew this day would be different from the countless ones before it. Something had shifted in the air, and that change felt almost palpable. Saturday turned out to be unexpectedly warm. The sun bathed the house's roof in gold, and I realized it had been ages since I'd gone out for a simple walk. Running into Josh by the staircase, I suggested, "Want to go for a walk?" The waterfront's beautiful this time of year. He nodded eagerly, as if he'd been waiting for the invitation. We took his car, a slightly beat-up pickup truck he'd rented for his internship. The drive was short but filled with light conversation. I pointed out spots I had loved when I first moved to Seattle, while he shared stories about his life, about how hard it was to live up to family expectations, especially when you weren't even sure what you wanted for yourself. The waterfront was lively but not noisy. Couples strolled hand in hand, and children ran around with kites. We grabbed coffee from a small cafe on the corner, and I noticed how Josh took in everything around him, like he was seeing the world for the first time. "Have you always liked places like this?" he asked, watching the boats gently bobbing in the water. "Yes," I admitted. "There's something authentic about them. You know, like life could still be simple?" He nodded, and something flickered in his expression, something I couldn't quite read. We sat down on a bench, watching the sun slowly sink beyond the horizon. A cool breeze rolled in, and without thinking, I hugged myself against the chill. Josh noticed and draped his jacket over my shoulders. "Thanks," I said, smiling, the gesture warming me more than the jacket itself. Our conversation grew deeper. Josh opened up about his childhood and how his father had always expected specific achievements from him: perfect grades, a prestigious university, an internship at a big-name company. "Sometimes it feels like I'm living someone else's life," he confessed, staring off into the distance. "I want more, but I don't know what more even is, or how to get there." I was quiet for a moment. His words struck a chord, touching something painfully familiar. "I understand," I finally said. "There are days when it feels like everything's frozen, like you're just existing, not living, and sometimes that's terrifying." He looked at me intently, and in his gaze I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: genuine understanding. "Do you think it's stupid?" he asked hesitantly, as though bracing for the answer. "No," I replied. "I think it's honest." The conversation left me with a strange feeling. On the one hand, it was light, like the breeze that tousled my hair. On the other, it carried a weight, a significance I couldn't quite name. On the drive back, we spoke very little. The warm music playing on the radio filled the car, and the silence between us felt comfortable. As we pulled into the driveway, it struck me that I hadn't felt tired at any point during the evening. Quite the opposite. For the first time in ages, I felt alive. By the time we got home that evening, the sky was heavy with dark clouds. I noticed how the wind had picked up, sweeping light leaves off the road, and soon the first raindrops began to turn into a full downpour. "Perfect timing," I muttered with a wry smile as I stepped out of the car. Josh followed, shutting the pickup door behind him. We exchanged glances, and I caught a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Run," he said, but we barely managed a few steps before the rain drenched us completely. I laughed, feeling the cold drops soak my face and clothes, the absurdity of it all somehow exhilarating. We reached the porch, both of us soaked through. I shook the water from my hair, still laughing, when I noticed Josh looking at me. His smile had vanished, replaced by a serious, almost searching gaze, as though he was trying to find an answer to something only he knew. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed my unease. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer. He began but didn't finish. His lips brushed mine, soft, hesitant, fleeting. After a few hours, "Josh," my voice was hoarse, trembling. This is wrong." He looked at me, and I didn't see regret in his eyes, only pain that told me he already knew what I was going to say. "I'm sorry," he whispered, stepping back. "I didn't mean, I need to go inside," I interrupted, cutting him off before he could finish. Turning away, I practically ran into the house, tears welling in my eyes. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, struggling to compose myself. My heart was racing, and it felt like the world around me was collapsing. Outside, Josh remained on the porch. I heard him exhale deeply, then the sound of his footsteps retreating into the rain. What had just happened? How had I let it happen? The same question kept running through my mind, but I couldn't find any answers. I avoided Josh. It wasn't easy in a house where he was living with us, but I tried. Every day I found some excuse to leave early. A walk, work, even pointless trips to the grocery store. When I returned, I made sure Ryan was home. It created a buffer, a safe distance. But it was futile. His presence was everywhere. In the quiet glances at the table, in the awkward silences when our paths crossed by chance. Every time I walked past Josh's room, I felt a strange, nervous tension. His door was closed, but behind it, there seemed to be a storm of emotions I couldn't ignore. One late evening, I stood in the kitchen, staring out at the darkness beyond the window. Rain was drizzling again, soft and steady, tapping against the glass. My phone vibrated on the counter. It was a message from Josh. "I'm sorry. I never meant to make things so complicated, but I can't stop thinking about you." My heart stopped. I reread the words, feeling a surge of emotions, fear, guilt, and something darker, more magnetic. I wanted to respond, but my fingers refused to move. What could I even say? That I couldn't stop thinking about him either? That his kiss had been the only moment in ages when I felt truly alive? I put the phone down and tried to distract myself, but when it vibrated again, I grabbed it instantly, as if my response would somehow decide the course of my entire life. "I understand if you want me to leave, but you need to know, this isn't just a coincidence for me." I hesitated. My soul was tearing apart. Should I write back to put an end to this? Or say nothing at all? Instead, without thinking, I typed a single word: "Don't." I hit send and regretted it immediately. But it was too late. The message was delivered, and I sat there in the darkened kitchen feeling turmoil boiling inside me. I tried to rationalize, to calm myself, but my thoughts scattered chaotically in every direction. That night, I couldn't sleep. Josh didn't message again, but his words, his voice, his gaze, all of it now lived inside me. I was on the edge. Josh appeared in the kitchen the next morning as though nothing had happened. His gaze was calm, but I knew it was just a facade. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me, holding a mug of coffee. "I was thinking," he began, carefully choosing his words, "you seem tired. Maybe we could take a trip out of town, just to get away for a bit. It might help us both." I hesitated but eventually nodded. I couldn't endure another day in the house, heavy with tension. We drove out of town. The road wound along lakes and through dense forests, sunlight filtering through the branches. We barely spoke, but the silence wasn't awkward. It felt charged, as if each of us were waiting for the right moment to say something but held back. We stopped at a small cafe perched by the edge of a lake. The air inside smelled of fresh pastries and coffee. We sat at a wooden table by the window, watching ripples dance across the water's surface. "Do you like it here?" Josh asked, breaking the silence. "Yes," I smiled. "This place, it feels peaceful, like time has stopped." He nodded, looking at me over the rim of his mug. "Sometimes it feels like moments like this are the only things that matter. Everything else, it's just noise." His words hit something deep within me, breaking down another piece of the wall I'd been holding up. After finishing our coffee, we walked along the shore. Josh talked about learning to manage his family's expectations, about his fear of falling short. His voice carried weariness, but also a longing to be understood. On the drive back, he suddenly said, "There's one place I want to show you." We turned off onto a small lookout point that opened up to a view of the valley below. The forest stretched out endlessly, and a distant lake shimmered under the sunlight. Josh parked the car, and we stepped out. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine. I leaned against the railing, gazing at the view, but I could feel him approach. His breath was soft, but I heard it clearly. "I can't keep this inside anymore," he finally said. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a resoluteness I couldn't ignore. "You mean too much to me." I didn't turn, afraid to meet his gaze. Inside, a storm raged. I knew the line was about to be crossed. "Josh, this isn't right," I began, but he interrupted me. "Maybe not, but you feel it too. Don't try to deny it." Slowly, I turned to face him, and he was looking at me as though nothing else in the world existed but the two of us. His hand gently brushed my cheek, and in that moment I couldn't resist anymore. He leaned in and kissed me again. This time, I didn't pull away. The kiss was long, filled with the raw sincerity and pain we had both been suppressing. But it was also tinged with hopelessness, because deep down, I knew this couldn't last. When we got back to the car, neither of us spoke. But something had changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was understanding. The next morning, as I walked into the kitchen, I could feel it immediately. Something had changed. Josh was sitting at the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His face held a strange mixture of determination and pain. "We need to talk," he said before I could utter a word. His voice was steady, but it trembled slightly. I sat across from him, unsure of what to expect, but knowing that whatever he was about to say would be important. "I've decided to leave," he said plainly, his eyes locking with mine. "It's the right thing to do." "Is this because of yesterday?" I managed to ask, unable to meet his gaze. He shook his head, his expression both gentle and resolute. "No," he replied. "It's because of everything. Because of us. I don't want to ruin your life, or mine. What happened was a mistake, but it's one I'll never forget." His words pierced through me. I didn't know how to respond. A lump formed in my throat, and I fought to hold back tears. "But what about—" I began, but he cut me off. "You deserve more than I can give you, and this isn't right, don't you see? I thought I could handle it, but I just want you to be happy." His words felt final, real. I could feel myself breaking apart, but I was too frozen to stop him. He stood up slowly and walked toward me. His hand brushed mine gently. "Thank you for being there for me," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's changed my life." He left the kitchen, leaving me sitting alone. Moments later, I heard the front door close, and I knew he was gone for good. I stayed there, unmoving, until the clock struck noon. The house was quiet, as if it had been suspended in time with his departure. But this silence was different, empty and cold. Later, I found myself outside his room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, it was spotless, as though he had never been there. On the desk, there was a book, the same one he had found in the garage, Dandelion Wine. On the yellowed first page, he had left a note. "You taught me to see the beauty in simple things. Thank you for that, Jay." I picked up the book, pressed it against my chest, and for the first time all day, let the tears fall. This was a goodbye I knew I would never forget. But I also knew it was an ending. Painful, heavy, but necessary. And while the house sank back into its familiar quiet, it wasn't the same. There was something new in that silence, a sense of clarity, an understanding that I had to move forward. When Ryan returned from his business trip, his cheerful mood stood in stark contrast to the emptiness I felt inside. He hugged me, holding on for a moment longer than usual, as if sensing that something was amiss. But he said nothing, and I was grateful for his silence. A few days later, during dinner, he made a surprising suggestion. Maybe we should take a vacation. Go somewhere warm, just get away and reset. I was taken aback. It wasn't like him. Ryan had always been so focused on work, and trips were rare, usually tied to business. But there was sincerity in his eyes. He was trying to fix something, even if he didn't fully understand what it was. Yes, I think that's a good idea, I said after a pause, more to myself than to him. Maybe I really did need this chance. The day before the trip, I received one final message from Josh. It was brief, but it held everything he wanted to say. Thank you for everything. You changed my life. Goodbye. I stared at the screen for a long time, searching for the right response, but instead of a long farewell, I wrote a single word. Goodbye. Those few letters were heavier than I had imagined, but they marked the final end. A goodbye to him, to what had been between us, and to the part of me that I realized had been suppressed for so long. The trip with Ryan began awkwardly. Neither of us knew how to be around the other, but little by little things started to shift. We walked along beaches, sat in silence watching sunsets, and, unexpectedly, began to talk. Real conversations, not just the routine exchanges we'd fallen into.